There's a moment most men miss. Not because they're stupid, not because they're blind, but because by the time it happens, they've already convinced themselves they're imagining it. And honestly, that's the tragedy. Because a woman rarely chooses a man loudly. It's not usually fireworks, not some dramatic confession, not her throwing herself at you like the movies taught you to expect. No, most of the time, she chooses you quietly, while you're busy trying to decode whether she even cares at all. And if you've ever sat there replaying her messages in your head, wondering why one woman suddenly feels different from all the others, why her attention feels heavier somehow, more personal, more intentional, then stay with me for a minute. Because this video might save you from making the same mistake a lot of emotionally disconnected men make without realizing it. And if somewhere during this video you feel that uncomfortable little knot in your chest, that feeling of, damn, she actually did that, then subscribe, not for me, for you, because some truths only make sense when you're finally ready to hear them. Now listen carefully. A woman who has truly chosen you emotionally does something most men completely underestimate. She stops performing. That's the sign. Not seduction, not flirting, not even attention. Performance disappears. And men almost always miss the significance of that because they've spent their entire lives chasing validation from women who are still acting. See, when a woman is unsure about you, she manages your perception constantly. She thinks about how she sounds, how long to wait before replying, whether she seems too interested, whether she looks attractive enough, whether she's saying the right thing. There's tension in her, even if she likes you. But when she starts emotionally choosing you, something shifts. You'll notice moments where she forgets to be impressive, and that sounds small until you experience it in real life. Maybe she calls you while exhausted, hair messy, voice flat, no performance in her tone at all. Maybe she tells you something slightly embarrassing and doesn't immediately try to recover from it. Maybe she sits in silence with you and doesn't panic trying to fill it. That silence matters more than most men understand, because people only relax around someone they emotionally trust not to punish them for being human. And this is where men sabotage themselves. Because instead of recognizing emotional closeness, they interpret the loss of performance as loss of attraction. Her texts become calmer, more natural, less polished. And suddenly his anxious brain says, she's losing interest. No, sometimes she's actually lowering her emotional armor. There's a difference, a huge one. But you have to understand male loneliness to really see why this gets missed. A lot of men were never taught how emotional safety looks, only how excitement looks. So they chase intensity, uncertainty, hot and cold behavior, because anxiety feels familiar. But emotional choosing often feels quieter than that, more stable. And stability can feel strangely unfamiliar when your nervous system is addicted to unpredictability. That's why some men accidentally push away the one woman who genuinely picked them. Not because she didn't care, because she finally stopped auditioning, and he mistook peace for boredom. And somewhere deep down, maybe you've done that too. You know what's strange? The men who are the most desperate to be chosen are often the least able to recognize it when it finally happens. Because they expect love to arrive looking dramatic, obsessive texting, constant reassurance, intense passion every second of the day. But real emotional attachment in a woman often becomes visible in much smaller, almost painfully subtle ways. Like how she starts including you in thoughts that have nothing to do with attraction anymore. That's the part men overlook. A woman who is still deciding about you usually interacts with you in moments. But a woman who has chosen you mentally, you start existing in the background of her life, and that changes everything. She sees something random during her day and thinks of you immediately. Not strategically, not to keep you hooked, not because some dating advice told her to. It's automatic. You become psychologically present in her inner world. That's why she suddenly sends you strange little things that don't seem important. A photo of the sky on her drive home. A voice note about something stupid her coworker said. A song she heard for 3 seconds in a grocery store. And to a disconnected man, those things can seem meaningless. But psychologically, those moments are incredibly intimate. Because attention is intimacy. Where someone's mind goes naturally tells you where their emotional energy lives. And women are very careful with emotional energy once they've been hurt enough. That's something many men never fully understand. A woman can flirt with someone she doesn't trust. She can desire someone she'd never build with. She can even sleep beside someone emotionally and still feel completely alone. But when she starts mentally weaving you into ordinary moments of her life, that's different. That's attachment forming quietly beneath the surface. And ironically, this is usually the exact phase where men become careless. Because once they realize she likes them, they relax emotionally. Too much. He stops listening closely, stops noticing details, stops being present, and she feels it immediately. Women are unbelievably sensitive to emotional presence when they care deeply. Not because they're overthinking, because attachment sharpens perception. A woman who has chosen you notices the shift in your energy before your words even catch up to it. She notices when your responses become mechanical, when you're physically there but psychologically somewhere else, when you stop looking at her with curiosity and start looking at her with certainty. And certainty can become dangerous. Because once a man feels safe emotionally, he sometimes stops courting her mind. That's when she begins grieving the relationship while still inside it, quietly. Most breakups emotionally happen long before they happen physically. That's why some men feel blindsided. But the woman usually isn't leaving suddenly. She's leaving after months of feeling emotionally unseen. And honestly, one of the saddest things I've ever noticed as a psychologist is how many men only become emotionally attentive again once they feel her pulling away. Then suddenly he notices everything. The slower replies, the distance in her voice, the missing warmth. But by then, she's exhausted. Because she spent months trying to hand him emotional closeness in tiny, fragile ways, and he treated those moments like background noise. And maybe hearing that hurts a little. Good. It should. Because if a woman starts giving you access to her unfiltered mind, her small thoughts, her ordinary self, you need to understand what you're actually being trusted with. Not perfection, not performance, her real inner world. And that's rare. Much rarer than attraction. There's another sign men misunderstand all the time. And this one is dangerous. Because it doesn't look romantic on the surface. In fact, it often feels uncomfortable. A woman who has emotionally chosen you will eventually stop trying to look emotionally invincible in front of you. Now pay attention to that wording. Not weak, not dependent, not fragile in some dramatic movie-like way. Just honest. And honesty is terrifying when someone actually matters to you. See, when a woman doesn't care deeply yet, she can stay composed almost effortlessly. She can disappear for days and act unaffected. She can keep conversations light. She can maintain control. But once emotional attachment deepens, control becomes harder. Because now your opinion has emotional weight. And that changes her behavior in subtle ways she often doesn't even realize herself. You'll notice moments where her emotions leak through despite her trying to stay composed. Maybe she gets quieter after something you said hurt her instead of pretending it didn't matter. Maybe she suddenly over-explains herself during conflict because losing connection with you genuinely scares her. Maybe she asks questions that seem small, but underneath them is one terrifying thought. Do I matter to you the way you matter to me? Most men hear the surface question and miss the emotional question underneath it. That's the problem. Women communicate emotionally in layers, and emotionally unaware men only respond to the literal words. But attachment lives underneath language. A woman who has chosen you emotionally starts revealing where she's sensitive. Not intentionally, it just happens. You begin seeing the places where she doubts herself, the places where she's been hurt before, the parts she normally keeps hidden because experience taught her those parts aren't always safe with people. And this is where a man's emotional maturity gets exposed completely. Because a lot of men say they want a deeply connected woman. Until connection requires emotional responsibility, that's when panic starts. Because now her feelings are real. Now your inconsistency affects somebody. Now your silence has consequences. And some men unconsciously retreat the moment love stops being an ego boost and starts becoming emotional accountability. That's why emotionally unavailable men are often addicted to the early stages of dating. The beginning feels amazing, validation, excitement, mystery, but deeper attachment? That requires presence, consistency, emotional steadiness. And honestly, many men were never taught how to hold emotional intimacy without feeling trapped by it. So they pull away right when the woman starts opening for real, and she feels that shift immediately. A woman can sense when she revealed something vulnerable, and instead of moving closer emotionally, the man subtly disconnected. Sometimes it's tiny. His tone changes, his attention drops. He becomes less emotionally engaged. But trust me, she notices. And once a woman feels emotionally unsafe after opening up, something closes inside her. Not always dramatically, sometimes quietly. She becomes more careful, more measured, less emotionally generous. And the man usually thinks, she changed. No, she adapted. There's a difference. You have to understand, women don't usually give emotional vulnerability recklessly after enough life experience, especially not to men they truly desire long-term. So if she starts showing you the parts of herself that aren't polished, the insecurities she tries to hide from the world, the fears she laughs off around everybody else, you are not just receiving her attention, you are receiving her trust. And trust is infinitely more intimate than attraction. Attraction can happen in seconds. Trust? Trust is built from 1,000 tiny emotional moments where someone slowly realizes, you're safe enough for me to stop pretending. There's something else that happens when a woman has truly chosen you. And most men completely misread it because their ego gets in the way. She starts watching you differently. Not obsessively, not like a detective trying to catch you doing something wrong. It's deeper than that. She begins studying your emotional patterns, your moods, your silences, the things you avoid talking about, the version of you that appears when you're tired, disappointed, discouraged. Because when a woman becomes emotionally invested, she stops asking herself, do I like him? And starts asking herself, can I emotionally survive loving him? That's a very different question. And honestly, it's one many men never realize she's asking. You'll notice it in little moments. The way she pauses before bringing up something sensitive because she's trying to understand how emotionally safe you are under pressure. The way she watches your reactions when life frustrates you. The way she listens when you talk about people who disappointed you in the past. Because women pay attention to emotional patterns far more than men think. Not because they're manipulative, because attachment makes observation instinctive. A woman who has chosen you wants to know what loving you will eventually cost her emotionally. And if that sentence made you uncomfortable, good. Because love always costs something. Patience, vulnerability, compromise, emotional labor. The question is whether the connection feels emotionally safe enough to make the cost worth it. And this is where a lot of men unintentionally fail. Not because they're bad men, because they're emotionally disconnected from themselves. A man who cannot sit honestly with his own emotions usually becomes unpredictable in relationships without meaning to. One day he's warm, next day distant, one moment emotionally open, then suddenly unreachable. And the woman attached to him starts living in emotional confusion, trying to read the weather of his mind every day. That kind of inconsistency slowly exhausts people, especially women who care deeply. You know what women rarely say out loud? The most draining thing isn't always pain, it's uncertainty. Not knowing where they stand with you, not knowing which version of you they'll get today. And men often underestimate how psychologically consuming that becomes over time. Especially when she chose you sincerely. Because once a woman emotionally invests in a man, she often tries to understand him before she judges him. That's why she gives chances longer than people realize. She explains herself repeatedly, tries different ways of communicating, makes excuses for behavior that quietly hurts her. Not because she's weak, because attachment naturally makes humans more patient with people they love. But patience has a breaking point, and once emotional exhaustion replaces hope, something changes in her eyes. It's subtle. She still talks to you, still responds, still smiles sometimes, but emotionally, she stops reaching. And that's the moment many men finally panic. because they can feel her withdrawing emotionally, even if they can't explain how. Suddenly, the warmth is gone, the curiosity disappears, the emotional softness fades. And what's heartbreaking is that some men only realize how deeply they were loved once the emotional effort disappears. When she no longer asks questions, no longer checks in, no longer reacts emotionally. That silence hits differently, because indifference is much colder than anger. Anger still has attachment inside it, but emotional detachment? That usually comes after someone cared for a very long time. And if a woman is still trying to understand you, still trying to connect, still emotionally responding to you, don't take that lightly. It means her heart is still in the room. Here's the part nobody tells men honestly enough. Being chosen by a woman is not the same thing as keeping her emotionally safe enough to stay open. Those are two completely different things, and a lot of men confuse the first moment of emotional connection with permanence. Like, once she loves you, the work is over. But love isn't a finish line. It's a living psychological environment. And the environment you create around a woman emotionally determines whether her attachment deepens or quietly starts protecting itself from you. Because when a woman truly chooses a man, she does something incredibly vulnerable psychologically. She begins attaching her nervous system to his presence. That means your tone affects her, your consistency affects her, your emotional steadiness affects her. Not because she's fragile, because humans bond biologically and emotionally whether they admit it or not. And this is why emotionally mature love feels different from ego-driven attention. A woman who genuinely chose you isn't just looking for stimulation anymore. She's looking for emotional rest, a place where she doesn't have to constantly question her value, constantly decode mixed signals, constantly prepare herself for disappointment. And you'd be shocked how many beautiful relationships slowly die because the man never understood this. He thought attraction was enough. It isn't. You know what makes a woman stay emotionally soft with a man over time? Not perfection, predictability, emotional honesty, feeling emotionally considered, the feeling that her inner world matters to you even when it's inconvenient. That's what deepens attachment. Because the older people get, the less impressive charm becomes. Anybody can be charming for a few weeks. Anybody can say beautiful things in the beginning. But emotional consistency? That's rare. And women notice rarity. Especially women who have already experienced disappointment before. That's why the strongest sign she has truly chosen you often appears in moments that look ordinary to everybody else. The way her body relaxes around you. The way she looks at you when you aren't performing. The way she slowly stops protecting herself from you emotionally. That's not casual. That's enormous. And if you're lucky enough to experience that with someone, don't become arrogant about it. Don't assume she'll tolerate emotional neglect forever just because she loves deeply. People can love you sincerely and still leave once staying becomes too painful psychologically. That's the part immature men never believe until it happens to them, because they confuse being loved with being irreplaceable. Nobody is irreplaceable once emotional safety disappears long enough. Not permanently. And maybe that's the uncomfortable truth you needed tonight. Not every woman who desires you chooses you emotionally. And not every woman who chooses you emotionally will keep choosing you if her heart starts feeling alone beside you. So if she's giving you her unfiltered attention, her trust, her emotional honesty, her softness behind closed doors when nobody else sees it, slow down enough to recognize what you're actually holding, because some men spend years searching for exactly that connection. Then destroy it by treating emotional intimacy like something that will always be there, no matter how carelessly they handle it. And by the time they finally understand what they lost, she's already gone emotionally, long before she ever leaves physically.